Have you noticed how the most reflective people around you seem to be withdrawing more and more from everyday conversations? How those who once shared profound insights about life, society, and the future now remain silent in social gatherings, choosing to observe quietly while shallow discussions dominate the space? Maybe you yourself have felt this growing distance, that sense that your most important concerns and reflections find no echo in the world around you. If you've ever caught yourself thinking, it's becoming harder to find conversations that truly matter, that challenge your ideas, or explore questions beyond the immediate and the trivial, you're not imagining things. What you're observing is a very real and revealing phenomenon of our time, the increasing isolation of those who think deeply about the human condition and the direction we're taking as a species. This distancing is not a coincidence, nor is it the result of some misunderstood intellectual superiority. It's a direct symptom of the fundamental transformations our society is undergoing in this unique historical moment. For the first time in human history, we live in a world where the pace of technological change surpasses our collective capacity for reflection, and where the algorithms that govern our access to information favor immediacy, emotionality, and polarization over complexity, nuance, and contemplation. The sages of our time are not withdrawing by personal choice, but because the cultural environment we've created has rendered their voices increasingly inaudible amidst the deafening noise of digital modernity. To grasp the depth of this transformation, we need to look at how knowledge and wisdom have traditionally been cultivated and transmitted throughout human history. For millennia, in cultures as diverse as ancient Greece, imperial China, the medieval Islamic world, and indigenous American traditions, there were specific social spaces dedicated to contemplation and deep dialogue. The Greek agora wasn't just a place for commerce, but a hub of philosophical debate where citizens gathered to explore fundamental questions about justice, truth, and virtue. Medieval monasteries preserved and developed knowledge through centuries of political turbulence. Japanese tea houses created elaborate rituals that forced participants to slow down and reflect. Native American talking circles established protocols to ensure every voice was heard and considered with due care. In all these historical contexts, there was an implicit recognition that wisdom does not emerge spontaneously. It requires time, silence, contemplation, and crucially, a social environment that values and protects these processes. The sages of those times were not isolated figures, but integrated members of communities that understood the value of their insights and created structures to nurture and share their wisdom. They had receptive audiences, attentive disciples, and social institutions that acknowledged their essential contribution to the common good. Most importantly, the pace of life allowed complex ideas to be developed over time, tested in prolonged discussions, and refined through multiple iterations before being accepted or rejected. This social structure supporting deep thought began to disintegrate with the Industrial Revolution, but was completely dismantled by the digital revolution of the last 20 years. What we have today is something unprecedented in human history, an attention economy that operates by capturing and monetizing every second of human mental time. The platforms that dominate our social lives are not neutral. They are sophisticated behavioral engineering machines designed to maximize engagement, not understanding. They operate according to the ruthless logic of attention capitalism, where content that generates clicks, shares, and instant emotional reactions is algorithmically favored, while reflections requiring time and contemplation are systematically buried. The result is an informational environment fundamentally hostile to the kind of thinking that produces genuine wisdom. When a complex idea that requires 15 minutes of careful explanation competes for attention with a meme that provokes an instant reaction, the meme always wins. When a nuanced analysis of a complex social issue is placed alongside a simple slogan that confirms existing biases, the slogan dominates the conversation. When a perspective that questions our fundamental assumptions faces a narrative that allows us to maintain our beliefs unchanged, we invariably choose the comfort of confirmation over the discomfort of intellectual growth. The deep thinkers of our time find themselves in an impossible position. They can try to adapt their ideas to the format and pace of digital communication, but this inevitably leads to excessive simplification and distortion of their most important insights. A reflection on the nature of human consciousness in the age of artificial intelligence cannot be adequately conveyed in a 280-character social media post. An analysis of the ethical implications of biotechnology doesn't translate well into a 30-second video. A contemplation on the meaning of death in a society that promises digital immortality requires a kind of sustained attention that few are still capable of offering. The alternative is to preserve the integrity of their thinking, but accept an increasingly smaller audience. And that is exactly what is happening. The true intellectuals of our time are gradually retreating from public discussion spaces, not out of elitism or disdain for the masses, but because they recognize that their voices have been lost in the digital cacophony. They write books that few read in full, give lectures to ever smaller audiences, and participate in conversations that take place in increasingly closed circles. The isolation of the wise is not a choice. It is a rational response to an environment that has made their participation both useless and impossible. This phenomenon has consequences far beyond the personal frustration of the thinkers involved. A society that loses access to the wisdom of its most contemplative members is a society that loses the ability to successfully navigate complex challenges that require historical perspective, systemic thinking, and careful consideration of long-term consequences. We are seeing the results of this in our collective inability to adequately respond to crises like climate change, growing inequality, political polarization, and the existential risks of artificial intelligence. All of these problems require exactly the kind of deep, long-term thinking that our attention economy systematically discourages. The irony is that we've never had such extensive technical access to accumulated human wisdom. Anyone with an internet connection can instantly access philosophical, scientific, and literary texts that represent the best of human thought across millennia. But technical access is not the same as real access when these texts compete for our attention with an endless stream of content designed to capture and hold us through immediate emotional stimuli. They become practically invisible. It's like having access to an infinite library, but being trapped in a permanent fairground, where vendors constantly shout offers and promises that prevent us from hearing our own thoughts. The problem worsens because our capacity for sustained attention is being systematically eroded by constant exposure to fragmented digital stimuli. Neurological studies show that brains exposed to constant streams of digital information develop activation patterns that favor fast and superficial processing over deep and sustained reflection. We are literally rewiring our brains in ways that make us less capable of engaging with complex ideas that require patient contemplation. With each passing generation, fewer people possess the basic cognitive capacity necessary to follow sophisticated philosophical arguments or to sustain the attention required for true understanding of complex issues. I want to pause for a moment to ask, have you felt this growing inability to maintain focus in deep conversations? That sense that your mind has been trained to constantly seek the next stimulus, making it hard to stay with an idea long enough to truly understand it? I know many of us struggle in silence against this fragmentation of our thinking capacity, perhaps feeling that we've lost something essential about ourselves without being able to name exactly what it was. If you recognize this experience, share it in the comments. I feel I lost the ability for deep attention when. Your honesty may help others realize they're not alone in this struggle against the acceleration of the modern world. But the isolation of the wise is not only a result of technological change, it is also a consequence of deeper social and economic transformations that have fundamentally altered the relationship between knowledge and power in our society. In previous eras, holders of wisdom generally also held social authority. Philosophers advised kings. Priests interpreted the divine will for entire communities. And elders were respected for their accumulated experience. This convergence between wisdom and power was not perfect and often led to corruption and abuse. But at least it created an institutional incentive to value and protect deep thinking. In contemporary society, we observe a radical divergence between knowledge and power. Economic and political power is concentrated in the hands of those who control information systems, logistics, and technology, not necessarily those who possess wisdom about the human condition or a deep understanding of the long-term implications of our collective actions. The true power centers of our time are tech companies led by individuals who may be brilliant in engineering and business, but who often demonstrate a surprisingly limited understanding of human psychology, social dynamics, or the lessons of history on how societies evolve and collapse. This dissociation between wisdom and power means that the most important voices for our collective future are precisely those with the least influence over the decisions shaping that future. As philosophers thinking deeply about AI ethics are not in the rooms where decisions about how the technology will be developed and implemented are made, historians who understand the patterns of civilizational collapse are not consulted by political leaders making decisions that could trigger those very patterns. Psychologists who study the effects of social media on human mental health have no power to regulate the platforms causing the damage they document. The result is a world driven by a form of technical intelligence disconnected from deeper human wisdom. We have increasingly sophisticated systems operated by people with an ever more limited understanding of the human implications of these systems. It's as if we are building ever more powerful machines while progressively losing the ability to understand what those machines should be used for or what kind of life they should help us create. This divergence between technical capacity and human wisdom is visible in nearly every aspect of contemporary life. We have algorithms capable of predicting human behavior with extraordinary precision, but we use this ability mainly to sell products and influence elections, not to create conditions that promote human flourishing. We've developed biotechnologies that could eliminate hereditary diseases, but we implement these technologies within economic systems that ensure only the wealthy have access to their benefits. We've created communication systems that could facilitate global dialogue on shared challenges. Yet we've allowed these systems to be hijacked by algorithms that amplify division and polarization because that generates more engagement and therefore more profit. The isolation of the wise is both a cause and a consequence of this dissociation. As deep thinkers withdraw from public spaces of discussion, important decisions are increasingly made without their input. And as those decisions create a world increasingly hostile to deep thought, more wise individuals retreat, creating a vicious cycle that accelerates our collective drift toward a future guided by technical intelligence, disconnected from human wisdom. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the contemporary isolation of the wise is how it reflects a fundamental shift in the very nature of what we consider wisdom. For most of human history, wisdom was associated with the ability to integrate knowledge with lived experience, to see long-term patterns, to understand the connections between different aspects of human experience, and to offer guidance on how to live well in the face of uncertainty and mortality. Wisdom was recognized as qualitatively different from intelligence or technical knowledge. It was a form of understanding that emerged from the combination of careful thought and deep life experience. In the information age, this traditional conception of wisdom has been progressively replaced by an almost exclusive valuation of two types of knowledge: factual information that can be quickly verified and personal opinion that can be immediately expressed. The intermediate space, where wisdom traditionally resided, the domain of careful reflection on complex questions that do not allow simple or quick answers, has been colonized by algorithms that offer instant information and platforms that encourage immediate emotional reactions. There is no longer a social space for the kind of patient contemplation that turns information into understanding and understanding into wisdom. This creates a paradoxical situation where we have access to more information than any previous civilization, but produce less wisdom than societies that were far less technologically advanced. An ordinary person today has instant access to more facts about the world than the greatest scholars of the past. Yet that same person often shows less ability to use those facts to wisely navigate the basic challenges of human existence. We know more about how the brain works than Buddha or Confucius did, yet we produce far less practical insight on how to achieve inner peace or social harmony. This reversal is particularly evident in how we deal with uncertainty and complexity. Traditional societies developed sophisticated philosophical and spiritual traditions to help individuals live constructively with what they could not control or fully understand. Modern society, in contrast, promises to eliminate uncertainty through more information and to deliver control through better technology, but that promise is fundamentally illusory. The world becomes more complex and unpredictable as our technical capacity to modify it increases. The result is that we find ourselves less prepared psychologically and philosophically to deal with uncertainty and complexity than societies that were far less technologically advanced. The wise individuals of our time recognize these fundamental limitations of the modern approach to knowledge, but their attempts to articulate more nuanced perspectives are systematically discouraged by a cultural environment that rewards performative certainty over intellectual humility and simple solutions over honest acknowledgement of complexity. A philosopher who tries to explain why a particular issue does not allow for a simple answer will always be outshined in the attention economy by a commentator offering an apparently clear and definitive solution, even if that solution is superficial or fundamentally flawed. This dynamic has led many of the most careful thinkers of our time into a form of internal exile. They continue to work, research, and reflect, but increasingly do so in isolation or in small communities of other thinkers who share their frustration with the state of public discourse. They write for specialized audiences, attend academic conferences the general public never hears about, and have deep conversations only with other members of an intellectual class, increasingly disconnected from broader society. This growing separation between deep thinkers and the rest of society is not just a loss for the intellectuals themselves. It is a catastrophic loss for all of humanity. At a moment in history when we face unprecedented challenges that require collective wisdom to navigate, we are systematically marginalizing those members of our species most capable of offering that wisdom. It's as if we are entering a perfect navigational storm while choosing to ignore our most experienced navigators in favor of GPS systems that may fail at the exact moment we need them most. The question this raises is profoundly disturbing. Is it possible that our species has created conditions that make collective wisdom impossible precisely at the historical moment when that wisdom is most desperately needed? Could it be that the same technical intelligence that has given us unprecedented power over our environment has also eliminated our ability to use that power wisely? These are not rhetorical questions. They are urgent, practical problems whose answers will determine whether we can create a future worth living in or whether we are heading towards some form of civilizational collapse. But recognizing the reality of the isolation of the wise does not mean accepting this situation as inevitable or permanent. Throughout history, human societies have demonstrated a remarkable capacity to recognize when their own structures have become dysfunctional and to create new institutions that restore balance between different forms of intelligence and wisdom. The problem we face today is that we are trying to navigate these transformations using the very systems of thought that created the problem in the first place. We cannot solve the isolation of the wise using more attention technology or more digital platforms. We need fundamental changes in how we organize our time, our attention, and our collective priorities. Some of these changes are already beginning to emerge on the margins of our society. Small communities are experimenting with ways of life that prioritize contemplation over consumption, depth over speed, and quality of attention over quantity of information. There are growing movements dedicated to the practice of slow thinking, digital Sabbaths, and other forms of cultural resistance to the constant acceleration of modern life. Some entrepreneurs are creating physical and digital spaces specifically designed to facilitate deep conversation and sustained thinking. Educators are developing curricula that teach contemplation and reflection as basic skills as important as literacy and numeracy. These initiatives are still small and fragmented, but they represent signs of a potential broader shift in cultural consciousness about the value of wisdom and the need to protect the conditions that allow it to develop. The growth of long-form podcasts, renewed interest in ancient philosophy, the mindfulness movement, and the rising popularity of contemplative practices in secular contexts suggest that many people intuitively feel that something essential was lost in the transition to digital modernity and are seeking ways to recover it. If these reflections have touched something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't found the words to express, know that you are not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you'll connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not only understanding, but also wiser ways of living amidst the transformations we are witnessing. This is not just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth. Join us on this ongoing journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with more wisdom and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and divided. The future of human wisdom will not be determined solely by technological developments or economic changes, but by conscious choices we make about the kind of society we want to create and the kinds of voices we choose to honor and amplify. The isolation of the wise is a symptom of collective choices that have prioritized speed over reflection, engagement over understanding, and economic growth over human flourishing. But symptoms can be treated when we recognize their nature and are willing to make the necessary changes to restore health. The question that remains is whether we will be able to make these choices before the isolation of the wise becomes so complete that we lose access to the very wisdom we need to navigate the challenges we have created for ourselves. This is a question each of us must answer, not only with our thoughts, but with our daily actions, how we choose to use our attention, our time, and our energy. The fate of human wisdom is ultimately in our hands. The question is whether we still have the wisdom to recognize this and act accordingly,